The chainsaw roared to life at exactly 5:00 a.m., shattering the peaceful silence of the neighborhood. Sparks flew as metal met metal, and the screeching sound echoed down the pristine HOA-regulated street. Lights flicked on one by one in every house. Blinds shifted. Neighbors peeked out, horrified and intrigued. And right in the middle of it all, standing in her perfectly manicured driveway in a leopard print robe and fuzzy slippers, was Patricia Malone, the self-appointed queen of the Homeowners Association, her mouth wide open in shock. I didn't stop. Jason Reeves revved the chainsaw again, slicing through the old wooden fence that had started this whole mess. If she didn't want a fence, fine. I had a better idea, a much bigger idea, and Patricia was about to find out just how much I was willing to escalate. Moving into the neighborhood had felt like a dream at first. The kind of place where lawns were trimmed to perfection, sidewalks were spotless, and kids rode their bikes without a care in the world. I had just bought my first house, a beautiful 2-story home with a big backyard, a far cry from the cramped apartments I had lived in for years. It was supposed to be my escape, my peaceful little slice of heaven. But heaven had a gatekeeper, and her name was Patricia Malone. I first met her within 24 hours of moving in. There was no warm welcome, no friendly plate of cookies, just a sharp knock on my door followed by a woman in her mid-50s with a clipboard, a tight smile, and the kind of haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager." "Jason, is it?" she said, not waiting for an answer. "I'm Patricia, the HOA president. I just wanted to go over a few things." A few things turned out to be a printed list of violations I had apparently committed before I even unpacked my last box. My mailbox was half an inch too tall. My garbage cans were placed in the wrong spot. My grass, my brand new grass, was, according to her, the wrong shade of green. I tried to be polite, I really did. But after the third visit in 2 days, where she criticized my porch light for being too bright, I started to realize Patricia wasn't just a concerned neighbor. She was on a power trip, and I was her latest victim. It wasn't until I met Sophia Torres, the quiet single mother who lived 3 houses down, that I realized the full extent of Patricia's reign of terror. I was out walking my dog when I noticed Sophia frantically removing a small, tasteful sign from her front yard, a sign advertising her home-based graphic design business. "Hey, is everything okay?" I asked, watching her hands tremble slightly as she tucked the sign behind a bush. Sophia glanced over her shoulder nervously. "Patricia's making her rounds today. I can't let her see this." "Your business sign, is that against the rules?" She sighed, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Technically, yes, no home businesses allowed, but this is how I support my daughter since her father left. I can't afford commercial space, and Patricia knows it." "So she targets you specifically?" I asked, already feeling my blood pressure rise. Sophia looked down. "Let's just say she selectively enforces rules. Your fence isn't the first thing she's gone after without cause." Then came the fence incident. I had built a simple wooden fence, nothing fancy, nothing outrageous, just a normal, standard privacy fence to keep my dog from wandering off and, more importantly, to keep Patricia from constantly peering into my backyard. The moment she saw it, you'd think I had set the neighborhood on fire. "You can't just put up a fence," she shrieked, storming up my driveway. "It violates HOA policy." I blinked. "There are literally fences all over the neighborhood." "Those were approved," she snapped. "Yours is an eyesore." "How is mine different?" "Because," she huffed, folding her arms, "I don't like it." That's when I knew this wasn't about rules, this wasn't about the neighborhood, this was about control. She started fining me almost immediately. First a warning notice, then an official violation, then daily fines, $50 today, $100 tomorrow. It was ridiculous. But when I asked for proof that my fence broke any rules, she had nothing, because legally speaking, I had done nothing wrong. So I did the only logical thing, I ignored her. And that's when she really lost it. One morning, I stepped outside to find her measuring my lawn with a tape measure, scowling like a disappointed school teacher. A week later, she had a tow truck ready to haul away my perfectly registered car because it was parked at the wrong angle. She even went as far as to call the city on me, claiming I was creating an unsafe environment with my fence. That was the final straw. If Patricia wanted a war, she was going to get one. I called up my buddy Jake, an engineer with a love for over-the-top projects. When I told him what was happening, he laughed so hard he nearly dropped his phone. "Dude," he said between wheezes, "you need to go nuclear, build a fortress. No, build a barricade." At first I thought he was joking, but the more I thought about it, the more I loved the idea. If she thought my little wooden fence was a problem, she hadn't seen anything yet. I spent the next 2 weeks drawing up plans not for a fence but for a 15-foot tall steel-reinforced barricade. I checked the HOA rule book twice. Nowhere did it say anything about steel barricades. There were rules about wood, vinyl, even hedges, but nothing, absolutely nothing about metal walls. So I made some calls, found a contractor willing to work fast, paid extra for expedited materials, and set a construction date. And that brings us to today. At 5:00 a.m. sharp, I fired up the chainsaw and tore down the old fence in the most obnoxious way possible. If Patricia wanted to play dirty, I was more than happy to return the favor. By the time she stumbled out of her house, still half asleep in her robe, my crew was already unloading the steel sheets. The look on her face, priceless. "What in God's name are you doing?" she shrieked, running up to my driveway. I turned off the chainsaw and grinned, "Just making some updates. You were right, Patricia, the old fence had to go." Her eyes darted to the towering steel panels being drilled into place. This is illegal." I pulled out my copy of the HOA rulebook, the one she had used to harass me for weeks, and flipped to the relevant section. "Actually, Patricia, there's no rule against this." She gasped like a Victorian woman about to faint. "You can't do this." "I can," I said, smiling, "and I am." She stormed off, mumbling something about an emergency HOA meeting, but I wasn't worried, because for the first time since moving in, I was actually looking forward to this battle. And I had only just begun. The barricade was coming together faster than I expected. By the time the sun fully rose, half of the steel sheets were already bolted into place. The sound of drilling and hammering echoed down the street, and it didn't take long before the entire neighborhood was awake, watching in stunned silence. Some of them whispered among themselves, others gawked like they were witnessing a crime scene. And then there was Patricia, packing back and forth on her driveway, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was calling the HOA board, probably demanding an emergency meeting, trying to get anyone to shut down my project, but there was nothing she could do. The barricade was completely legal. I had checked, double-checked, and triple-checked. There were no rules against steel walls. There were no height restrictions in the neighborhood's guidelines. Everything I was doing was within my rights. And Patricia hated that more than anything. About an hour later, just as my crew was securing the final steel panel for the day, Patricia stormed over again, this time dragging along a man in a cheap suit. His face was pale, nervous, like he had been forced into this confrontation against his will. "This is Mr. Patterson, our HOA lawyer," Patricia announced, her voice dripping with triumph. "He's here to inform you that this monstrosity is a clear violation of community standards." I turned to the so-called lawyer, who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. "Is that true?" I asked, folding my arms. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. "Well, not exactly. The current HOA guidelines don't explicitly ban this kind of structure, but nothing," Patricia cut him off. "This is an eyesore, it's offensive, and it's destroying property values." I smirked. "That's funny. I remember you saying the same thing about my wooden fence." Her face turned a shade of red I didn't even know was possible. "This is completely different." Mr. Patterson looked between us like a man trapped in a burning building. "Legally speaking," he said carefully, "there's not much we can do. The board would have to vote on new regulations, and even then, they wouldn't apply retroactively. Jason is technically within his rights to build this structure." Patricia's jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might shatter. "Fine," she spat. "If the HOA won't do anything, I'll take this to the city. You just wait, Jason. You think you're smart, but you're going to regret this." I watched as she stormed off, practically dragging the lawyer behind her. The moment she disappeared into her house, one of my neighbors, an older guy named Frank who had lived in the neighborhood for years, walked over, grinning like a kid who just saw someone pull off the greatest prank in history. "Son, I don't know what Patricia did to piss you off this much, but I just want you to know that I have never been more entertained in my life," he said, chuckling. "Hell, I'll even pitch in for materials if it means seeing her lose her mind." I laughed and clapped him on the back. "I appreciate it, Frank, but I've got this covered." As Frank walked away, I noticed Sophia standing at the edge of my property, looking at the barricade with a mixture of awe and concern. "This is going to make her come after all of us harder," she said quietly. "You know that, right?" "I'm counting on it," I replied. "The more she escalates, the more she exposes herself." Sophia bit her lip. "Easy for you to say. You don't have as much to lose as some of us." Before I could respond, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to Patricia's house. A tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit stepped out, Patricia's husband, Robert Malone. Unlike his wife, Robert was known for being reasonable, even likable. He was a high-powered attorney who spent most of his time traveling, which perhaps explained how he managed to stay married to Patricia. Robert surveyed the scene, his expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, he walked directly toward me. "Mr. Reeves," he said, extending his hand, "I believe we haven't formally met." I shook his hand, unsure where this was going. "Jason." "Robert Malone, I understand there's been some tension between you and my wife." "That's one way to put it." Robert glanced at the barricade, then back at me. "Impressive engineering. Mind if we speak privately for a moment?" We walked to the side of my house, away from curious neighbors and construction workers. "I want to apologize for my wife's behavior," Robert said, his voice low. "Patricia can be excessive in her enforcement of HOA rules." "Excessive is an understatement," I replied. "She's targeting me for no reason." Robert sighed. "I know, and you're not the first. Look, I'd like to resolve this like adults. What would it take for you to consider removing the barricade?" I crossed my arms. "Patricia backs off completely. No more fines, no more harassment, no more surprise inspections of my property." "I'll speak with her," Robert promised. "But I should warn you, Patricia has connections in this city that go beyond the HOA. Her brother-in-law sits on the city council if you push her too far." "Is that a threat?" "Not from me," he clarified. "It's a reality check. Patricia doesn't lose gracefully." He handed me his business card. "Call me if you want to discuss a compromise. In the meantime, well, it's quite a statement piece you've got there." The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile before he walked back to his car. Over the next few days, the barricade became the hottest topic in the neighborhood. Some people were furious, others found it hilarious, but regardless of their opinions, everyone was talking about it. Even the local news caught wind of the feud and sent a reporter to do a segment on the suburban battle of the century. Patricia, of course, was doing everything in her power to stop me. She filed complaint after complaint with the city, claiming my barricade was a public safety hazard. She argued that it blocked emergency services, that it was structurally unsound, that it was ruining the charm of the community. None of it stuck. The city inspectors came out, took one look at my permits, and told her there was nothing they could do. That only made her angrier. She started harassing the workers I had hired, marching up to them in the middle of the day and demanding to see their licenses. When that didn't work, she tried bribing them to stop construction. That didn't work either. I had hired professionals, and they weren't about to throw away a paycheck because some entitled HOA president was throwing a tantrum. Then the excavation for the barricade's foundation uncovered something unexpected, what appeared to be the remains of an old stone wall, clearly predating any of the homes in the area. The construction foreman called me over. "You might want to see this," he said, pointing to the weathered stones. "This looks like it could be historical. Might need to call in an expert before we go further." Word spread quickly. By afternoon, a small crowd had gathered to see the discovery. Among them was Dr. Alina Reed, a history professor from the local university who happened to live in the neighboring subdivision. "This is fascinating," she said, carefully examining the stonework. "This could be part of the original settlement from the 1850s. The Mason family's homestead was supposed to be somewhere in this area." Patricia pushed through the crowd, face flushed with anger. When she saw the excavation, she froze. "What is this now? Another delay tactic?" Dr. Reed straightened up. "Actually, Mrs. Malone, this is potentially a significant historical find. If verified, it would be protected under the Historic Preservation Act." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "There's nothing historic about this neighborhood except the rules Mr. Reeves keeps breaking." "History doesn't care about your HOA rules," Dr. Reed replied evenly. "If this is what I think it is, no one can remove or build over it without proper archaeological assessment." As if the universe itself wanted to pile on Patricia's misery, a news van pulled up at that exact moment. The reporter who stepped out was none other than Claire Bennett, the host of the popular local segment, Community Spotlight. "We received a tip about a historical discovery," Claire said, approaching with her cameraman in tow. "Dr. Reed, what can you tell us about this find?" As Dr. Reed enthusiastically explained the potential significance of the stone wall, Patricia's face contorted with rage. She stomped back to her house, slamming the door so hard that her decorative wreath fell off. That night, as I was reviewing the day's progress with the construction foreman, Sophia appeared at my door, looking anxious. "We need to talk," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Patricia just called an emergency HOA meeting for tomorrow night. She's gathering everyone against you." "Let her try," I said with more confidence than I felt. Sophia shook her head. "You don't understand. She's not just going after your barricade anymore. She's targeting anyone who supports you. She told me if I don't vote against you, she'll report my home business to the city licensing board." "She can't do that." She can and she will, Sophia insisted. Patricia doesn't just want to win, she wants to destroy anyone who stands against her, and some of us can't afford to fight back like you can. I felt a twinge of guilt. In my determination to stand up to Patricia, I hadn't considered how she might retaliate against others. What if we turn the tables? I suggested. Instead of me against Patricia, what if it becomes the neighborhood against Patricia's tyranny? Sophia looked doubtful. How? By showing everyone exactly who she really is. And then, just when I thought Patricia had run out of ways to be a nuisance, she pulled out her biggest weapon yet. She called a town hall meeting. I got the official notice in my mailbox, written in the kind of aggressive legalese that only Patricia could produce. The entire HOA board was being summoned along with select homeowners to discuss urgent community matters. In other words, she was staging a public execution, and I was the guest of honor. I wasn't worried. In fact, I was looking forward to it. What I didn't expect was to find my car vandalized the morning of the meeting, deep scratches along both sides, and the word eyesore etched into the hood. I knew immediately who was responsible, but proving it would be another matter entirely. You need to set up cameras, Frank advised when he saw the damage. Patricia's getting desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. I nodded, already planning my next move. Are you coming to the meeting tonight? Wouldn't miss it, Frank said with a wink. And I've been talking to some of the other old-timers in the neighborhood. Patricia's made plenty of enemies over the years. You might be surprised by how much support you have. The meeting was held in the local community center, a building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the early 90s. By the time I arrived, the place was packed. Homeowners filled the rows of metal folding chairs, whispering among themselves, glancing at me with curiosity and amusement. At the front of the room, sitting behind a long table like a panel of judges, were the HOA board members. And right in the middle, front and center, was Patricia, looking smugger than ever. I took my seat near the back, arms crossed, waiting for the show to start. Patricia wasted no time. She stood up, cleared her throat, and launched into a speech that sounded rehearsed, like she had been practicing it in the mirror for days. She spoke about tradition, about community standards, about how my barricade was a threat to everything the neighborhood stood for. She painted me as a reckless, inconsiderate troublemaker who had come in and disrupted the harmony of the HOA. Then she turned to the board. I demand that we take immediate legal action against this violation, she declared. If we allow this kind of behavior, what's next? Neon-colored houses, junk cars on the lawn, anarchy. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Anarchy over a wall. This woman was out of her mind. One of the board members, an older woman named Diane Simmons, cleared her throat. Patricia, as much as we appreciate your passion for the community, we have reviewed the guidelines extensively. And unfortunately, Jason's construction is not in violation of any current regulations. Patricia's eyes bulged. Then we changed the regulations. Diane sighed. We can vote on new guidelines, but as you well know, they won't apply retroactively. The room fell silent. Patricia's face twisted in frustration, her fingers tightening around the papers in front of her. She knew she had lost, but Patricia wasn't the kind of person to admit defeat gracefully. I decided to twist the knife a little. Raising my hand, I stood up. If the HOA is so concerned about community standards, I said, maybe we should also review some of the questionable decisions made by leadership. Patricia turned to glare at me. What are you implying? I smiled. Oh, just that I've been looking through some of the HOA's financial records. It's interesting how some fines seem to disappear when they involve certain people. A murmur spread through the crowd. Patricia's expression flickered with panic for just a second before she masked it with anger, but I saw it, and so did everyone else. The board members exchanged glances. Diane folded her hands and leaned forward. Jason, would you be willing to provide more details about these concerns? I shrugged. Absolutely. In fact, I have copies. Patricia's face went completely white. I knew then, without a doubt, that this war was far from over. But for the first time, I wasn't the one on the defensive. Patricia had spent weeks trying to take me down. Now it was my turn. Just as I was about to present my evidence, Robert Malone stood up from his seat at the back of the room. Before we go any further with these accusations, he said in his smooth attorney's voice, I'd like to say a few words. The room tensed. Everyone expected Robert to defend his wife, to use his legal expertise to shut down my claims. Instead, he sighed deeply. As many of you know, I travel frequently for work. What you may not know is that I've been deliberately scheduling those trips to avoid witnessing what my wife has turned this community into. Patricia's mouth fell open. Robert, what are you doing? He didn't look at her. For years, I've made excuses for Patricia's behavior. I've quietly paid off people she's harassed, I've smoothed over her conflicts, and I've tried to manage the damage she's done. But seeing how far things have gone with Mr. Reeves's situation and the emerging financial questions, I can no longer in good conscience remain silent. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Robert reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. I have here documentation of 23 separate incidents where HOA funds were misappropriated for personal expenses under my wife's direction. I've already provided copies to the board treasurer and will make these available to any homeowner who wishes to review them. Patricia's face flushed crimson. "You traitor," she hissed, "after everything I've done for this neighborhood." "Patricia," Robert said calmly, "you've done nothing but terrorize this neighborhood in pursuit of your own perfect vision, a vision no one else signed up for." The dam broke. Suddenly everyone had a Patricia story to tell. Frank described how she had tried to block his disabled daughter from installing a wheelchair ramp because it disrupted the aesthetic. An elderly couple recounted being fined for having medical equipment delivered too late in the day. And Sophia, her voice shaking but determined, stood up and described years of threats and intimidation over her small home business. "She told me if I didn't support her agenda, she would make sure I lost both my home and my livelihood," Sophia said, "and I'm not the only one." Patricia couldn't take it anymore. She slammed her hands on the table, papers flying. "This is character assassination. I've dedicated my life to maintaining our property values and community standards. Without me, this neighborhood would fall apart." "Actually," said a new voice from the doorway, "I think the community will survive just fine." Everyone turned to see Detective Andrea Morgan of the County Police Department, standing with two uniformed officers. "Patricia Malone," Detective Morgan said, stepping forward, "based on the financial documentation provided by your husband and corroborated by bank records, I'm here to question you regarding the potential embezzlement of HOA funds." The room erupted into chaos, gasps, whispers, even a few scattered applause. Patricia looked around wildly, like a cornered animal searching for escape. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked. "You can't arrest me for managing HOA money." "No one said anything about arrest yet," Detective Morgan replied evenly. "But using community funds for personal expenses, such as your spa membership, your luxury cruise, and what appears to be a diamond tennis bracelet, does warrant investigation." Patricia's eyes darted to Robert, who stood impassively at the back of the room. "You did this," she whispered. "You planned this." Robert shook his head. "You did this to yourself, Patricia. Every time you bullied someone, every time you abused your power, every time you took money that wasn't yours." Patricia didn't show up the next morning. For the first time in weeks, there was no dramatic confrontation, no furious stomping up my driveway, no threats of legal action. The neighborhood felt eerily quiet without her presence looming over everything, but I knew better than to think she had given up. Patricia wasn't the type to accept defeat. If she wasn't out in the open, that meant she was working on something behind the scenes. I didn't have to wait long to find out what it was. Around noon, a black SUV rolled up in front of my house. The driver stepped out, adjusting his tie like he was preparing for a big moment. He was tall, clean-shaven, and had the kind of expression that screamed government official. He carried a leather briefcase, and as he walked toward my door, I caught a glimpse of the city's emblem on his lapel. Great, Patricia had escalated this to the city level. I met him on the porch before he could even knock. "Jason Reeves, right?" he asked, offering a professional smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's me," I said. "Let me guess, you're here about the barricade." He gave a small nod. "I'm John Richards, City Zoning Inspector. We received a formal complaint regarding a potential code violation on your property. I was asked to conduct an inspection and verify compliance with local regulations." I smiled. "By formal complaint, you mean Patricia, right?" He hesitated for a second before clearing his throat. "I can't disclose the complainant's identity, but I assure you this is a routine investigation." Routine, sure, because it was totally normal for a city official to be sent out over a perfectly legal structure that just happened to be annoying the neighborhood dictator. I stepped aside and motioned for him to take a look. "Be my guest." John walked the perimeter of the barricade, pulling out a measuring tape, taking notes on a clipboard. I could see the gears turning in his head. He wanted to find something wrong with it. He wanted to give Patricia the victory she was so desperately clawing for. But there was nothing. After about 15 minutes of meticulous inspection, he sighed and tucked his notepad back into his briefcase. "Well," he said, "everything appears to be up to code. There's no violation here." I grinned. "That's what I thought." He hesitated again, shifting uncomfortably. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "between you and me, I don't usually get sent out for things like this, but Mrs. Malone is persistent." I snorted. That's one way to put it. Off the record, he said, she's already filed 3 additional complaints. If you don't take this thing down, she's going to keep coming after you. I leaned against the barricade and crossed my arms. Let her. John sighed, gave me a nod, and walked back to his SUV. As he drove away, I turned to see Patricia standing in her yard, watching from behind her curtains. The moment she saw me looking, she yanked them shut. She was furious, and that only made me more determined. That night, I was startled awake by the sound of breaking glass. I rushed downstairs to find one of my living room windows shattered, a brick lying on the floor with a note attached, "Tear it down or suffer the consequences." I immediately called the police, but I knew it would be Patricia's word against mine. With no cameras and no witnesses, I couldn't prove she was behind the vandalism. As I was sweeping up the glass, there was a soft knock at my back door. It was Sophia, looking pale and worried. "I saw her do it," she whispered. "Patricia." She threw the brick, then ran back to her house. "Will you tell the police?" Sophia hesitated. "I'm scared, Jason. She's already threatened to report my business if I testify against her." "She can't hurt you anymore," I assured her. "Not with what we know about her now. Plus, look around, you're not alone in this fight." I gestured to the street where several neighbors had gathered after hearing the commotion. Frank was there, along with the elderly couple Patricia had hassled about medical deliveries, and even Dr. Reed from the university. They weren't just curious onlookers, they were a community that had finally had enough of Patricia's reign of terror. 2 days later, I got another official letter from the HOA. This time, Patricia wasn't just threatening fines, she was demanding a full-blown legal battle. The letter accused me of willful defiance of community standards and stated that the HOA was seeking a court order to force the removal of my barricade. It was laughable. She was acting like I had built a toxic waste dump instead of a legal structure on my own property. But if she wanted to drag this into court, I was more than ready. I called my lawyer, handed him the letter, and let him go to work. Within a day, he had drafted a counterclaim, not only defending my right to keep the barricade, but also accusing Patricia of harassment, selective enforcement of HOA rules, and even financial misconduct within the association. And that's when everything changed. Week before our court date, a bombshell dropped. My lawyer had been digging through HOA records looking for inconsistencies, and he found something huge. Patricia had been misusing HOA funds for years. Small amounts here and there disguised as administrative fees, personal reimbursements, and vague maintenance costs that had no receipts attached. The total wasn't astronomical, but it was enough to raise serious questions. And more importantly, it was enough to get the rest of the HOA board involved. The next HOA meeting was supposed to be about my barricade. Instead, it turned into Patricia's public reckoning. The room was packed, homeowners filled every seat, and a few even had to stand in the back. People who had never cared about HOA politics before suddenly had a vested interest in what was about to go down. Even the board members looked uneasy, whispering among themselves as they shuffled papers. Patricia sat at the center of the long table at the front of the room, her usual air of confidence replaced with visible tension. She knew something was wrong, she just didn't know how bad it was going to be. When the meeting started, she immediately launched into her usual speech, talking about how I had defied the HOA and how my barricade was destroying the integrity of the neighborhood. Then my lawyer stood up. "Before we address the barricade issue," he said, "there's another matter that requires immediate attention." He placed a stack of documents on the table and slid them toward the board members. "These are financial records from the past 5 years," he continued. "They show a pattern of unauthorized expenses charged to the HOA budget, many of which were approved solely by Patricia Malone, the acting president." The room went silent. Patricia stiffened in her chair. "This is absurd," she said quickly. "I've always acted in the best interest of the HOA." "Then I assume you won't mind an independent audit," my lawyer interrupted. A murmur spread through the crowd. People started whispering, exchanging looks. The board members flipped through the papers, their faces darkening with every page. One of them, Diane, looked up. "Patricia," she said carefully, "these are serious accusations. If these transactions can't be properly accounted for, we may need to vote on your removal from the HOA board." Patricia's eyes darted around the room. For the first time since I met her, she looked genuinely afraid. "You can't do this," she said, voice shaking. "I've dedicated years to this community." Frank, the older neighbor who had supported me from the start, stood up. "Yeah, and you've made our lives miserable in the process," he said. "You know what? I vote to remove her right now." A few voices immediately echoed in agreement, then more. Within seconds, the entire room was filled with people cheering for Patricia's removal. The board members exchanged glances. Diane took a deep breath. "Effective immediately," she said. "Patricia Malone is suspended from the HOA board pending a full financial review." Patricia shot up from her chair, face pale, hands trembling. "This isn't over," she whispered before grabbing her purse and storming out of the meeting. But it was over. Patricia put her house up for sale the next month. The HOA dropped the lawsuit against me, and the barricade, still standing. In fact, it became something of a local landmark, a symbol of fighting back against ridiculous HOA tyranny. The historical stone wall discovered during construction was authenticated by university archaeologists and is now protected as part of the county's heritage sites. I've incorporated it into a community garden space beside the barricade, where neighbors gather for events and children learn about local history. Sophia's home business is now fully licensed and thriving, with no fear of HOA retaliation. She serves on the neighborhood welcoming committee, ensuring new residents receive a much warmer reception than I did. Robert Malone divorced Patricia and stayed in the neighborhood, becoming an advocate for HOA reform at the state level. He and I aren't exactly friends, but we share a mutual respect born from the trenches of our battle against Patricia's tyranny. And as for me, well, the next HOA election rolled around and a few neighbors jokingly suggested I should run for president. I didn't even have to campaign. I won by a landslide. My first official act as HOA president, rewriting those outdated guidelines to focus on community support rather than petty enforcement. And yes, I included a specific clause about steel barricades. They're now explicitly permitted with proper permits, of course. Sometimes when I sit in my backyard, looking at the barricade that started it all, I raise a glass to Patricia wherever she is. Without her relentless harassment, I never would have discovered what this community could really be. In trying to make everyone conform to her vision, she inadvertently created something much better, a neighborhood where people stand up for each other and pride themselves on their differences rather than their sameness. The ultimate irony, property values have gone up by 15% since Patricia left. Turns out people prefer living in a community with character, even if that character includes a 15-foot steel barricade with a historic stone wall at its base.